Well, we can probably begin anyway and take care of the first couple of things while we're waiting. So I'll call the meeting to order now. And is there any public comment on non-agenda items?
There is no such comment.
Thank you. We had minutes from our last meeting on September 13th. Are there any questions or changes? Any questions or suggestions for the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second Jim's motion.
Great. Give a first, second. All in favor of approving the minutes from last meeting?
Aye.
Thank you. Any abstentions?
Simone, you're on mute.
It's okay. All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone. We are going to go into legislative updates, and we can start with introductions. I guess we should all just introduce ourselves since some of us haven't met some of the folks on the call. So I'm Steve Gibson, trustee for District 3, and I'm the chair of this committee. Jim.
Brian, good to see you again. Jim Osterling, trustee C2.
Thanks. Alton.
Hi, everyone. Trustee Alton Wang, trustee seat 7. I'll pass it to Simone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simone Chen. I'm the student trustee.
Thank you. And our expert.
That's you, Ryan.
Before we proceed, just a procedural question. I'm trying to pull up the agenda on board docs and I'm getting the circle of death. Is it possible for Alex or somebody to share screen and put that up?
I'll be happy to do so. I'm pulling it up now.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Okay, that's it for me. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry to interrupt.
Ryan.
So I will confess, I did not necessarily read too closely to the materials before about 5 minutes before this call. And so I came in here planning to chat about federal issues.
Yes.
But it seems like we might have a larger conversation about state issues, something I'm certainly able to chat about. I noticed there's some interest in AB 928. So I just don't know how we want to structure this conversation. I can definitely talk about federal issues. Your superintendent president is an authority on where we are in AB 928, and I can back her up on several things. So I just don't know how we want to structure this conversation, and I'm just ready to rock and roll however we want to go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think what we should do is talk about state issues first. So both Erica and Ryan can update us on what's happening in the state. And then after that, we'll move on to federal. Thanks so much.
Okay, so I think I'll start with AB 928, which is the Berman bill that was sponsored by the Campaign for College Opportunity. And it requires that the whole goal behind it was to increase the number of students who are doing ADT degrees, associate degrees for transfer. But it also included requiring the 3 systems, UC, CSU, and the community colleges to come together and create a single GE pattern, a general education pattern that would go to all 3 systems, that would meet all 3 systems related to an associate degree. Now it's interesting because the associate degree for transfer only transfers to the CSU. It's not a UC degree. So what the new transfer pattern is it used to be what's called IGETC and CSU breadth, and now it's Cal GETC, and that's the general education transfer curriculum. The original requirement was 39 units, but the bill itself reduces the total number of units of GE down to 34. Now, how they got there, or how they were supposed to get there, especially because in our system, as well as in CSU and UC, faculty has primacy over the curriculum and over determining general education and all those things. And so there's an intersegmental committee of the academic senates, which involves 3, that's known as ICAS. That involves 3 faculty members from UC, 3 from CSU, and 3 from the community colleges. So they started meeting, they have closed meetings, they're not open meetings. And they started talking about, okay, how are we going to get to 34 units? Because we already know we've got to come down 5 units. So there was a lot of horse trading that went on. But the reality is it was really about what the CSU and the UCs wanted. And we were kind of at the kids' card table over off to the side. And what was most important to the CSU was to have speech communications be a degree requirement, because it's one of the what they call the golden 4 for the CSU. But it was not a requirement for the UCs. The UCs agreed to take that as one of the requirements. And the way they made room for it in their general education pattern was to make foreign language a graduation requirement rather than a course requirement. Now, because the ethnic studies courses had also already been added into the GE pattern, getting down to the 34 units required a reduction of some classes. And I'm going to pull up, sorry, I'm going to pull up the numbers here. So one thing was to have to make room for ethnic studies, and another was to make sure that the UCs would take the CSU when it comes to speech. But then what it also required, in order to get to 34 units, it required that, let's see, the humanities area was reduced from 3 classes down to 2 classes in order to make room for everything. But how we're impacted as a community college is that the UC does not have lifelong learning as a requirement. It's not part of their mission. It's not part of their general education pattern. We did have it in what was known as Area E in our GE pattern. For all of this horse trading, what went away was that requirement. Now, Area E is where kinesiology, health, nutrition, and all the student success classes are. UC said, we don't do that. We don't want it in the general education pattern. CSU said, well, maybe we could keep it. Maybe we'll make it an upper level requirement, which doesn't help us because we teach at the lower level. Or we can make it a graduation requirement. But again, whether or not that was really going to help us is unclear. So what came out of it was basically a GE pattern. This CalGETC is what it's called, 34 units. And if it gets approved by the ICAS, which they have to send a recommendation forward by May 31st of 2023. If it gets approved, what it means is all those courses that fund athletics, that's how we have athletics, are no longer general education requirements, because neither CSU nor UC fund athletics through instruction. We fund it through instruction, and general education courses is how we do that, but also because we have the 50% law, which means we have to spend 50% in the classroom. So if athletics is no longer funded through instruction, then it goes on to what's known as the wrong side of 50%. And then the other piece of it is our student success courses, because through our guided pathways efforts, through our first year experience programs, one of the key classes in there is college success and other things that are about student success. Those no longer will meet any general education requirements. When there was discussion about this, what the CSUs and the UCs said was, well, you have 34 units for the GEs, they can just take those units as electives. Except that the goal of the bill was to increase the number of students who are finishing associate degrees for transfer. On average, those majors are 18 units to 24 units. So if you add 34 GE units plus 18 to 24, that's going to leave either 2 or as many as 8 elective units. That's all that's going to be available to students. And we also need to remember that the Vision for Success goals tell us that we're supposed to reduce the number of excess units students take before they transfer. So ICAS is meeting on November 30th at Rio Hondo College. They, at that meeting, will be deciding how they're going to vote on the recommendation, because that has to happen sometime in the spring. That's going to be a key meeting because it's not clear whether or not that's a majority, unanimity. What if you have one faculty member from the CSU says yes, but 2 say no? So they've got to figure out what that voting structure looks like. If it does not pass there, if no recommendation comes out of ICAS, it gets kicked up to the system heads of UC, CSU, and the community colleges, and they will make the decision. Now, people have said, well, what do you think the legislative fix is to this? I don't know. I don't know what the legislative fix is. Assemblyman Berman was approached by community college folks, told about the problem, and he basically said, you know what? I write the laws, you implement them. So go and do that. So I don't know what the solution is, but we do have a problem. Did I miss anything, Ryan?
No, I think your closer was probably really relevant for this group, which is, what is the legislative fix? Just to emphasize, the Community College League and other folks, and by the way, I don't know if I should have introduced myself. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm with the Community College League. We're your trade association that represents you in Sacramento and DC, and we do a bunch of other things too. But my job, I think, is the most important and beneficial to you. But we repeatedly chatted with the legislature about how this is we didn't call it Area E, but we talked about how this dynamic would happen, which is a bill that mandates a narrowing of curriculum, taking into account the UC's near constitutional autonomy, would mean that we would be adopting a transfer pathway that, while the vast majority of students head to the CSU, are actually more adopting to a UC. Mm-hmm. Again, we didn't predict Area E would be eliminated, but this is something that we predicted. We told them that, like, basically what you're saying is, like, there are community college students who are probably not going to go to the UC, are going to have to adopt something that's more of a standard for the UC. And right. I'm sad to say we basically got no votes. So the answer from the state legislature is, like, yes, we passed the law. It's up to you to implement. We just want to narrow down these units. We don't really care if it's appropriate for UC or CSU. We are just going to narrow down this law. And so we are looking at the implementation issues. There are certain things that we can do still. The most important thing is supporting our academic senate. Just to be clear, our academic senate, and I don't know how much communication this group has with your local academic senate, but I would encourage you to support them if they are trying to find ways to continue to have the classes contained with Area E going forward. So it is not a done deal as far as an implementation standpoint,
right? But
really, what it's going to take is advocacy at the local level, working with our academic senates to support our statewide level academic senate who is not happy with this situation. Yeah, and we can push it going forward.
And I can speak a little to that because Kevin Walters, myself, and Tim McGrath. Tim McGrath is president of Golden West College. Kevin Walters is at Allen Hancock. We actually wrote a resolution, and brought it to the CEO, trustee, and joint trustee board meeting last Thursday. And Jenny May, the statewide academic senate person, was also there, president was also there. And we had a really good conversation about it. And then Kevin, Jenny, and I left the room for about 20 minutes. We revised the resolution and brought it back in a way that Jenny believed it would get support from the academic senates, because it's basically prioritizing the importance of supporting our student athletes and calling upon the system leaders to look at the equity implications of this decision, basically. And so that passed unanimously. And Tim McGrath and I, actually as recently as today, have been working on some talking points and FAQ because we know we're going to need to do advocacy. The other solution that was offered too, in terms, because Area E doesn't exist, like Area E is not going to be there. It's all of the CalGETSI things are now numbered. So they've changed even the nomenclature of the general education. But the question is, can some of those classes be moved into other general education areas? Now, that's in some institutions the holy grail, because what gets included in a general education area means teaching assignments. You know, it means, wow, if everybody, or if sociology classes are here in social sciences, this is great because people will need to take these classes. It's totally normal, right? So I'm not convinced that we're going to get the CSUs or the UCs to agree that some of those classes belong in other areas, especially because during one of the meetings, the ICAS meetings, when the UC said, oh, okay, we'll take speech. And then apparently the leader of the UC faculty turned to the community college faculty, the 3 Senate folks, and said, so you guys better up your game if we're going to have to take your classes. So that's what we're dealing with.
You know, Erica, this is something I've stolen from you, I think, maybe Kevin, but in that even if we adopt this pattern, there's absolutely no guarantee from the CSU that they would take our students, right? So
they haven't committed to expanding their capacity. So we could go ahead and make all of these changes, but it doesn't mean that more students will transfer, because ultimately we're held responsible for the number of people that transfer, but we have no ability to determine the number of the capacity of the CSUs or the UCs.
James did ask if we can go over the document I dropped, which is a fact sheet by ASCCC, and specifically page 3 really details out kind of what we're looking at for the proposed CalGETSI. Is it possible if I can maybe just share it and then click on the screen? And I think this is just a really good example. Yeah. So this is the proposed transfer pathway. So what we're concerned about is this NA over here.
Yeah.
Between 5 and 6. So the proposed transfer pathway, there are some changes that we can talk about for other things, but the main elimination you have right here is highlighted, and that's the lifelong learning and self-development. That is what we used to call Area E. There's some other changes like around arts and humanities. And again, you could actually really just dive into this document and take a look at it. But I think this is a really good, this is the proposed pathway. And you'll see here that the major change for us is the elimination of lifelong learning for a lower division requirement. There's some other changes. You know, this is the proposed transfer pathway. But
what would be, pardon me, what would be an example of lifelong learning and self-development, like 1 or 2 classes that would illustrate what's in that area of curriculum?
So that could be any kinesiology class. So that could be yoga. That could be health. That could be nutrition. Or it could be introduction to college success. So it's any of those kinds of classes.
And if we were looking at the current version, this is the proposed version. If we were looking at the current version, how many credits would fall into that area E category that is now eliminated?
I believe it's 3, isn't it, Ryan? Yeah,
3.
3.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So
And just so you know, kinesiology is the 9th most popular associate degree for transfer.
and then there's this theory that, like, to become a well-rounded citizen, life skills, particularly when we're talking about an obesity epidemic that we have, health, life skills, the idea that like these student success courses are tied into our guided pathways that the state has been pushing us forward for a good reason into. These would then be eliminated as far as a necessary path for transfer. So it is quite concerning. Again, the goal, I think at this point, like the remedy is to support our academic senate in advocating for trying to fold in area E as much as possible into the proposed pathways.
So would that mean, because I mean, it doesn't sound like there's only 34 units, right? And so unless are you saying collapsing it in with another one of the areas that currently exists? Or sorry, could you just clarify that, Ryan?
Yeah, well, I think there's a variety of decisions to make. I think one way, and again, this is actually where I'm leaning on Erica, because Erica she and the president, another president from the Central Valley, or the Central Coast, I should say, really kind of set our policy on here. But I think the goal would be to make sure that it is a lower division CSU requirement.
Yeah.
And therefore part of our institutions. There's also other options, but I don't want to, Erica, I really don't want to speak for you. So
Yeah, no, I think, could you pull up that chart again?
Sure.
That has the GE areas. So I just want to, so when you think about it, so the arts and humanities went down in one course. And so if you think about students, if you think about student success courses, if you think about nutrition, health, those kinds of classes, I don't see the CSU being willing to accept like a nutrition class as a biological science. So that's one problem, like, okay, to put it in another area, but where would it go? Or student success, I'm a social scientist as a historian. There's no way I would think as a faculty member, I wouldn't think a student success class is equivalent to history, economics, psychology, or what have you. So it's sort of a false equivalence when you take a look at those areas. And so that's why it's hard to know what the best option is, because if the train's already left the station, then what should we be advocating for? Okay, I'm done with that, Ryan. Thanks.
So I think from my perspective, it is support your academic senate. Actually, I don't know exactly if your academic senate's going wild, maybe not support them, but I would just recommend listening very carefully to them. And if it's reasonable, making sure you support them, because they completely understand this issue. Mm-hmm. They live it. And if you support them, then they can be stronger on the statewide level, which is where we are now considering this, which is that ICUS, that committee of 3 academic senates. So to me, that would be my ask, is that you guys support your academic senate in this measure. And I say that without actually knowing what they're. Maybe I should have looked it up before I said it, but I would assume they're reasonable on this issue. So
yeah, they are. They're very reasonable. Yeah. I think the other thing is some of my CEO colleagues were a little uncomfortable with us weighing in on this, because it is a faculty curriculum issue, and it's true. Faculty have primacy over curriculum, no question about it. And if this goes through the way it's proposed, unless we figure out a fix, we will wind up laying off faculty. And that's the last thing we want to do, not to mention the issue about athletics, because as I said, athletics we fund through instruction, but if we can't fund it that way, we can't fund it on the wrong side of 50% either. So that might be the legislative fix, although it's the fourth rail of politics in our state.
Thanks, Ryan and Erica. Any other questions from trustees on this issue? None. Great. Are there other, Erica and Ryan, are there other state issues we should hear about?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to chat a little bit about this, and then I think more importantly, perhaps you can ask me questions. But just very briefly, I think we all know we had an election, but very recently, no surprise on the state level, the Democrats are going to be in control of both houses, and all of the statewide constitutional offices, including the governor. What is worrisome, and when I have a moment, I'll drop this into the chat, is the LAO, which is the Legislative Analyst Office. They are the nonpartisan fiscal analyst for the state legislature. They have come out with some pretty dire fiscal projections for the state. It's going to be a best case scenario. It is looking like we're going to have a budget with very little increase, and then it could also very, very easily turn into budget cutting season. Now, there are some good things that we need to think about. First of all, the state legislature has done a great job, and the governor, in funding one-time initiatives where they can pretty easily put a stop to funding those initiatives. And they've also done a significant amount of funding in our budget reserves. So there could be a way out of this, especially in the first year, in that where we will not see significant budget cuts. And then the second thing to think about is actually under Proposition 98, how state resources are allocated to K-14. So our friends in K-12 and community colleges, even if the state budget goes down this year, we are probably looking like we're going to have an okay budget this year. So what does that mean? Number one, we are not looking for any kind of, well, we will be advocating, but we are not expecting, and I do not want my Christmas bonus next year to be predicated on any kind of budget increases or programmatic increases for next year. So we will be advocating for that, but I think we should all have our expectations the right way. This is certainly true on items that are outside of Proposition 98. So the main ones would be housing and financial aid reform. The second thing is when outside of Proposition 98 hits a hard budget year, but inside Proposition 98, we are looking good. Within the legislature, what they do very naturally is decide, okay, so what are kind of the non-98 things that I can throw into the 98 budget for this year? So a classic example is early childhood education, a noble cause, but if more additional early childhood education is thrown into Proposition 98, on the natural, that's actually a budget cut for community colleges. So that is just like one, I think the thing that we are primarily looking at for going forward to next year. Outside of that, I think we are thinking of ways that non-fiscal ways that can make the operations of our colleges easier, especially if we're not going to see a significant budget increase. So from our side of the aisle, Erica has referenced the 50% law repeatedly. It's going to be a very hard push, but potentially there's room to make that a little bit more flexible for your institutions. But then on the other side, We do see a significant push by labor to continue to impose statewide level bargaining constrictions on the number of faculty you might need to hire, their healthcare benefits, or other items. So we shall see. You know, we are like 2 weeks away. Yeah, 2 weeks away from the start of the legislative session. So it's hard to predict specifically what's going to happen. I guess the other item I would bring would be the Speaker Rendon is there's been a leadership decision where he is going to maintain his leadership through the next budget cycle, which ends June 30th. And then Robert Rivas from the Central Coast / Central Valley will be taking over. So it will be interesting to see to what extent that will determine the policy conversation here in Sacramento. I would, you know, and this is bad to speculate, but I would suggest we're not going to see a huge change, but certainly next year with Speaker Rivas, we will see a change in leadership, but I don't think we'll see a significant change going forward, at least for this year.
Thanks. Jim, you had last meeting in September, you'd had a question about hold harmless, safe harbor. Did you get your question answered? I think you were asking what rate it would be for the few coming years.
Well, I don't recall if it was answered at that time or not. Do you recall, Steve?
I think if Ryan or Erica want to address the rates, we can all benefit from.
I can tell you I didn't answer that question. So
Yeah.
So you know, we are coming off of the hold harmless. You know, we are coming into either stay even or budget cuts, and so the league is very involved in trying to make sure that SCFFF implementation is done as painlessly as possible. The only thing that I can really tell you, and this is just what I know, is when my boss spoke with the governor's office, they were told that they're not going to change they're not going to entertain any changes to the SCFF formula going forward for right now. And so I would just consider, you know, I don't know where Pasadena is on that path, but I would just consider that, like, I don't think that's going to change from the state. So,
So to be clear then, Ryan, we're currently in a hold harmless year, correct?
Yes.
Right now. And will next fiscal year also be a hold harmless? In other words, my question is when do we go off hold harmless?
Well, isn't it the 24-25 year sets the bar, sets the floor?
Yeah, and I think that's more of a question for Pasadena, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you the state overall projections, but I think more importantly, Pasadena needs to look at its enrollment, you know, where you are, and make that strategic decision. You know, it's what I can tell you is I would not expect in like an additional relief from the hold harmless provisions. So,
so they will wind down. They're in place for this fiscal year, and they're also in place for next fiscal year. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong.
Yeah.
And after that, we're back to the student success formula.
The true application of it, setting the floor, 24-25.
24-25, okay. And that will be based on our, you know, COVID is over, and that'll be based on our enrollment at that time.
Well, we'll have a decision to make because we'll have to look at our enrollment and how well we're doing in the student-centered funding formula to figure out if we want to use that as our base or if we want to look at 2018. But the problem of looking at 2018 is that it wouldn't include any COLAs. And so if you look at the number of COLAs we've gotten since 2018, we might lose more in going back to that than we would in moving forward with whatever our calculation is on hold harmless.
Okay, and it really just depends on how much our enrollment rebounds between now and then.
Yeah. Ryan, is that?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I was referring to, is I just wouldn't expect any significant changes from the state level.
Mhm.
And so it's really up to the folks on this call to determine what's best for the students
Yeah.
of Pasadena, with that framework in mind. You know, look, we hear it, like we hear that there's problems, and we bring it up. But at this point, I can't, you know, I would love to say that we maybe can make some magical changes that would work for all of our colleges, but at this point, it just seems like the state's just going to do what it, you know, it pledged to do a couple of years ago. So
Yeah.
that's how I would base all of my decisions on.
Yeah. And
Well,
Ryan,
until certain districts crash and burn.
Right. Okay. Well, you know,
Yeah. then-
hopefully before Pasadena. Let's say that Pasadena doesn't crash and burn first.
Well, yeah, but if you look at like the LACCD and the amount of FTS that they've lost,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, they do okay on the SCFF because of the people, because of their student population, but still, it's a pretty high hill to climb to get back.
But
Ryan, follow-up question, our FON is based not on our actual enrollment right now. This is a question, not a statement. It's based on our safe harbor year, which is what?
2019.
2019.
And we have emergency conditions. So that's why our FON went up.
Yeah. So Ryan, our FON is based on, not on our actual enrollment right now,
Mhm.
but rather it's based on our safe harbor enrollment, which again was 2019, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I would just say that in general, the FON calculation for almost every district is really not based on enrollment. There's a lot of problematic aspects of that calculation.
Right.
So, I feel your pain.
It's because we didn't all start at the same place. That's the problem, is that it's not equitable in how it's been applied. So if you had a really great CBO in 1996 who could play the system, you have a lower, you know, and the classic example is Coast Community College District sitting next to North Orange. North Orange has like 100 more higher FON than Coast does, even when they're the same size.
Well, and my question wasn't specific to Pasadena. I know our FON is on the high end. My question was just in general statewide. And then is the FON, so it's not really even based on the student census back in 2019. It's just based on other formula elements.
It's so the underlying basis for it is where your district was in 1988.
Mhm.
I use this example. I was made fun of earlier in the board meeting, but in 1988 I was 2 years old. I've changed a lot since then. And I assume the same thing with Pasadena. And so there is a problematic aspects with how we calculate the FON.
Yeah.
Now, I will say the moment you try to change the FON, because your districts you have built in this number into your operations, it's very hard to change it. And so there have been legitimate attempts to change it. But at this point, it has, from my perspective, there's not been something that's been equitable statewide. Something equitable probably would be including like ways to fund. So North Orange and Coast are really good examples. North Orange does not have a full-time faculty problem if we're going to view in the lens of number of full-time faculty, but they don't pay them very well and they don't get professional development. Coast, on the other hand, they don't have a lot of full-time faculty, but their faculty there are paid very well, and they get a lot of professional development. And so how do we equalize that situation? So there is no doubt though that the FON is just really not working. And we're just talking about equitably across districts. Of course, there's no question that the FON really has not gotten us to our 75-25 goal as well. So
Right, but also keep in mind that the 75-25 calculation does not take into account the number of full-time faculty who have overload. When they step into an overload assignment, they suddenly in the system they don't count as full-time faculty anymore. So
And that-
we're actually, so 75-25 could be much higher across the state, but we're not calculating it correctly.
then that's something that you get to say and I don't really get to say, but I would just say this, that the 75-25 goal was also predicated on a substantial increase in base funding
Yes,
that never materialized.
Yeah.
That's the real reason why we've never made our progress. We got 2 rounds of base funding in the early 90s, and then the Soviets lost the Cold War, and we shut down a bunch of military bases in Southern California, and California went into a recession, and that funding never materialized. So
Yeah, okay.
Looking at the time, I'm going to suggest we move on to federal unless
Yes.
there's any
Yeah.
other urgent, because at our next meeting, we definitely will hear more about what's happening on the state level then after the new, after,
after the governor's budget comes out in January, that's when we can have the next one, and then we'll really,
right. So let's move to federal. Any report, anything to share about what's happening on the federal level?
yeah, so and like, keep in mind I'm based in Sacramento, so I will give you a federal update, but I just want to keep that in mind. I think we're all watching closely the results of the House of Representatives. Clearly, the Republicans have taken control, or will be able to take control of the Congress. Real question is whether Speaker McCarthy will be able to exist on like a 5-seat majority. That'll be very difficult for him. For us, that means that ranking member Virginia Fox from North Carolina will be taking over the House Education and Welfare Committee. She is a former community college president. Strongly recommend, this is something that we always have to say, never, ever refer to training and your students in her presence. She says that we train apes and dogs, we educate humans. So if she's the chair and you're lucky enough to meet with her, always use the word education. Do not use the word training. On the Senate side, it is the Democrats are going to still maintain control of the Senate. That being said, we do not know who's going to be the chair of the what is called the HELP Committee, Healthcare, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. The current chair is Patty Murray. She is likely to head to the Appropriations chair, and so we're looking at potentially Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, but he is also in line with other items. So I think that's more of an open question. But I think what we can determine is even with a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president, both sides of the houses could not come together on a bargain on the Higher Education Act. So I just wouldn't expect a whole lot to come from Congress. There will be interesting things as far as appropriations that could be coming down the line. But right now, we are moving into a season of deadlock when it comes to DC. Some specific items of note, the DACA program has it's a little complicated, but a circuit appeals course has ruled that the previous administration did not follow administrative procedure to when implementing DACA. But then the current administration, the Biden administration, reinstituted how they're going to negotiate those rules. And now the appeals court said that while this first time you didn't do it very well, the second time we're going to ask the other court to determine if you followed correct administrative procedure. Long story short, your current DACA recipients can continue to be in the program, but new DACA folks who could qualify cannot apply for the program. I think that's about it as far as a federal update. Would be happy to answer any questions though.
Questions?
Where do we stand with Pell Grants for community college right now without any hoped for legislative changes?
Can you expand on your question? Like what specifically are you?
Like any increases to the Pell Grants? Do you think there'll be increases with what you see on the horizon?
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is because there's some problems with Pell Grants when it comes to community college students. They're not designed to serve our students, and so there's sort of two advocacy goals that we have when it comes to federal financial aid. Number one is increasing the level of Pell Grants, but then number two is making it easier for community college students to receive them. I would suggest that number two is actually easier. We're looking at administrative burdens that we can remove at the federal level. A small leap forward happened with the FAFSA simplification that happened last Congress. But that was quite small. So that's just an example. When it comes to the Department of Education, speaking with them, not just about increasing the level of award, but perhaps like permitting more flexibility for institutions to offer those awards and to whom. Those are all on the administrative side, which will have a more, likely outcome for us.
Like the negotiated rulemaking, is that where they can do a lot of that? Is through negotiated rulemaking?
Yes. So that's and even below that level, just the idea of like maybe we don't need to be so stringent on financial aid, like sanctions relative to Title IV fraud. Erica, I know this is your background, but I can drop into to jargon here if you want. But the whole idea is to recognize that perhaps in the service of protecting taxpayer dollars, we are not servicing all of the students that are eligible for financial aid. And how can we make it just a little bit more flexible for colleges who service high-risk populations, which would be community colleges? I think that's a major advocacy issue. The flip side of that, I'll just be candid, is that there are, unscrupulous for-profit institutions that live off of federal tax dollars that exploit students very similar to ours especially when it comes to loans. And so the flip side of that is that the Department of Education is reluctant to provide us the flexibility. And so anyways, that's just our advocacy asks. Really critical when you meet with your Congress members, your senators, and perhaps somebody else in the Department of Education to just chat about that trade-off. That was a filibuster. I'm not sure if you wanted.
No, that's fine. I think what I got from that, Ryan, was don't expect any increase in Pell Grant, but maybe there's room to make it more helpful to community college students. Maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Then we can move the agenda. Are there any terms of planning and priority, are there any priorities we want to look forward to in future meetings about legislation?
Yeah, so I hope that when we meet in January, that it's after the governor's budget. So we'll have an idea of what we should be advocating for in Sacramento at the end of January, but then we'll also be simultaneously preparing to go to DC in February. So by that time, we'll have the new Congress in place and we might know some more things. You know, I think Pell grants are going to continue, short-term Pell, all of those are going to continue to be the bane of our existence, and just making sure that HSI and other grants, NSF grants, those kinds of things are still available to us. And at least that's what's coming to mind right now. I'm sure there are other things that'll pop up.
Erica, I know there are pieces of legislation and policies that we've taken positions on in the past. And I know obviously when we did the last update, we got an update on how the bills that we supported or opposed moved through this past legislative session. Maybe next time it could be helpful if we could get a sense of what some of those priorities that are ongoing, like not the ones that have already obviously are either done or not moving anywhere, but what some of those potential policies that we want to pay more attention to or take a
At the state level or the national, or both?
I would say both, since since you know DC, it will be that it will be coming on the corner. But I would also put it as like, what is, obviously the priorities of the system as well, and how it impacts us. I think that'd be helpful. I think today's updates were really helpful because I think we're in a moment of transition in all levels of government. But I think it'd also be helpful to see kind of, okay, we're moving into the new legislative session here in California. We're moving into a new Congress. What do we want to be talking about? So in January, we'll have our state lobbyists with us. It was Dale Shimazaki, but he's retiring. So he has, okay, now I'm going to forget his name. David, thank you. David.
Starts with an N.
Yeah, I just met him. And Esperanza also. We will have them introduce themselves to you and also give you the kind of the lay of the land. They'll talk about the budget. Oh, thank you, David Nevin. Thank you. Having a brain cramp. They'll give us the lay of the land in terms of the budget, but also if there are any, what they've heard from legislators, what bills might be brewing out there, what's fully baked versus a spot bill. And so we will have them at our next meeting.
Perfect. And Ryan, on that question, is CCLC working on a statewide common talking points?
Yeah. So
for Sacramento in January.
Yes. So actually for both Sacramento in January and then DC in February.
Yeah.
We work closely with the Chancellor's office to craft talking points. The January talking points will be in reaction to the January 10th budget proposal. So I would pay close attention for the couple of days after that for us to see it from us. And it's basically my job to just make sure you don't leave our legislative conference without them. So you'll see them all over our legislative conference. And then we also craft talking points again with the Chancellor's office for our February NLS, which is the National Legislative Summit, run by our national counterparts, the ACCT. It is always interesting in crafting those because, of course, we are very influenced by them, but we also have very California specific talking points. And so we really do try to craft our own talking points. And we actually have a breakfast session in February to go over those as well.
Yeah, it's really helpful to do the legislative breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah. So do we have a meeting scheduled after January 10th, but before Sacramento legislative summit?
I don't think we do have one, but we could do we can do a doodle poll.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't we
Great.
do that so we can all
Yeah.
get on the same page before we go up there and
Yeah,
invite whoever is going to be heading to Sacramento?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. And I think we talked about what we wanted to talk about for the future agenda. Anything else before we adjourn?
Thank
Thanks
you,
so
Ryan,
much.
for coming to join us.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Ryan. Good to see you
good.
again.
And Steve, somebody from your household made a cameo.
Yes, my wife.
Yeah.
Well, good it wasn't my dog. That's usually pretty quiet. All right.
All right. Well,
Folks.
hey, thank you for chatting. And I see Erica about once a month. She will have no problems roping me in to chat with you some more. So
I have no problems.
yes.
Great.
So very happy to chat with this group more. I would say that this 928 discussion actually was pretty helpful for me. And so the more I get to talk to people out in real district land, as opposed to like a Sacramento conference room.
Yeah, definitely.
So don't hesitate to call me to chat back in. Okay.
Yeah,
we
and
need
as soon as we finalize those talking points, I'll make sure to I'll share them, and especially because we are going to need some sort of legislative fix, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we need to come up with some talking points because Ryan, after you walked us through the chart and so forth, I now understand what you're saying, but to reduce that to a soundbite for our assembly members and senators, just very specific sound bites of we need to change this.
Yeah.
Would be helpful. And if everybody was giving that message to all of our legislators up there in January.
Yeah, and the more anecdotes that we can get, we're really good at broad talking, we being the league, we're really good at broad talking points and broad data. But if on 928, but also I would just say if you go down the line on every issue, the critical thing is bringing stories or data from colleges like PCC, so that will be absolutely critical. So using our talking points as a framework to localize that would be really important.
Yeah.
Thanks. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Right, Steve, you run an efficient meeting.
Great, Chair Gibson.
Thanks, everybody.